I'm hoping to save myself an introduction here. Let's just, anybody not know who Josh Bersin is? All right, good. If there is anybody, I'll tell you all about him later on. Josh, just come on up. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Omar. All right, long day. Carl, thank you for putting me on at the end. And thank you for sticking around to listen to me. I'm really going to tell you why now is the time to buy EdCast's, actually, because something very interesting has happened. Most of you know I've been in the learning industry about as long as Kevin, maybe a little bit less, and been mostly as an analyst and a researcher. And what I've seen, in the learning and development marketplace, and I'm sure you guys know this, is an enormous amount of confusion. And what I want to do for the next 30 minutes or so, 25, 30 minutes, I'll go as fast as I can, is tell you why I think we're ready to move fast. It's been a while. We've had about 5 years of messy stuff going on, new technology, new ideas, new content, YouTube videos and everything else, but I'm going to kind of give you a sense of why I think it's urgent now. Number one, let me give you the business imperative. If you don't already know this, I think you've already heard this from a lot of people already. 80 to 90% of the US stock market capitalization is now IP, brand, and services. So I don't care what business you're in the people business. Even if you're an oil company, even if you're a manufacturer, you're in the people business. So the skills and alignment and capabilities and engagement of your people are 70 to 80% of your value. Individuals who are worried about their own professional or personal lives and their income, whether it be income inequality or their own personal aspirations, have figured out that the only way they're going to stay ahead is by learning. And so we went from a world, when I started in this space, by the way, you guys, I started, I actually didn't, I don't know if you know this, but I've never worked in HR or training. I've always been either a sales, marketing, or technology person and then became an analyst. The demand for learning is huge amongst your employees, not necessarily your business leaders, and that's been a huge shift. Charles mentioned productivity. I agree with him. Productivity is the issue. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing a big book that's going to come out next year on all this. And productivity is probably the reason we have a lot of the income inequality we have. If you look at the productivity data, this is another way of looking at it. We're growing at the slowest rate of any of the 4 industrial revolutions. There's, you've seen the story about the 4 industrial revolutions. When the steam engine was invented, the productivity growth was higher. When electricity was invented, the productivity growth was higher. When the first computers were invented in the 1960s and 1970s, the productivity growth was higher. This industrial revolution, where we have more technology than we've ever seen before, the productivity growth is anemic. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that we don't know how to use all this stuff yet. We really do have too much technology. I've been watching what's going on in the room behind the scenes. We're all doing our emails and checking our phones and maybe looking at what's going on in the news. But it's affected productivity at work. And when I go out and talk to big companies about what it is that really holds their people up, this is what I hear all the time. We don't know what meeting to go to. We don't know what email to respond to. We have far too much information and we don't know how to deal with it all. It's a giant problem of FOMO. You know what FOMO is? Fear of missing out. It's kind of a millennial term. We're all stuck with FOMO all day. And part of that is we need to learn in the middle of that. Now, we put this out last year. A lot of you have seen it. And I don't remember where we got the data, to be honest. I think Danny Johnson did some surveys. But it basically shows that on an average week, people have at most 15 to 20 to 25 minutes of quiet time to learn. Now, if you're a really well-run company or a really good manager, then you've given people more time. And one of the things I learned in all the research we did on engagement, for example, is we need to give people less to do. We need to create slack time in the system. But whether you do that or not, this is also one of the other issues that's changed the learning environment is we're trying to inject opportunities to learn in a day that is really flooded with information. We also know, by the way, that we don't work in the traditional hierarchical companies anymore. This has been maybe the most fascinating piece of research that I've done in the last 2 or 3 years. Last year was over 90%. This year was 88% of companies said the fundamental #1 talent issue they have is that the organization design is in the way of getting the work done. We can't get the right people to go into the right roles, to work on the right projects fast enough and move them from place to place across business units, across functions, across geographies to get the work done we want to do. And I think what's happening, now that I've had 5 years working in a how many of you have ever worked in a consulting firm? Interesting experience, isn't it? I think all companies are going to be running like consulting firms where we're going to have to learn how to change roles, change projects, move from place to place, lend our skills to other people on a regular basis. And if you look at most of the HR practices we have, they're focused on the individual and the individual's progression up the hierarchy. So there's a lot of things that are going to change there. So all of that has happened, and AI. And I won't spend a lot of time on the future of work because that's all sort of become a little bit of an overused phrase. But the way we talk about it in Deloitte is basically you have the hot workers, which is the human beings, the warm workers, which is the gig workers, and the cold workers, which is the machines. And the machines are getting a higher and a higher percentage of work every day. I'll give you my own personal story on this. My daughter, who graduated from college about 4 or 5 years ago, went into marketing. She's actually probably underemployed. She should probably be a data scientist or some sort of analyst like me, and she's working on that. She went to work in marketing. She had a series of jobs. She has a really good job as a marketing manager now. She really likes it. They just hired somebody in her group who does not have a college degree. In fact, I don't know if she really even graduated from high school, but she has a credential as a HubSpot administrator. And Julia said to me, you know what? I think she could do my job. And she makes half as much money as I do because the software is so sophisticated that a lot of the things that Julia learned how to do 3 or 4 years ago, they don't even need to do anymore. A lot of it's done by automation. That's happening in sales, that's happening in finance. Deloitte has a big project going on, trying to figure out what's the future of the actuarial profession as technology takes over that profession. So this is all stuff that's made the learning problem, probably more urgent than ever. To say nothing of the fact that if you're, worried about the engagement of your millennials, learning and career is the #1 driver of engagement for them. This is data from Glassdoor. Every year I go through the Glassdoor database and do a lot of analysis, and if you slice it by the age or the tenure of the person who rated the employee, what you see is for them, by far the #1 factor that correlates with their willingness to recommend your company as a place to work is their opportunity to develop themselves and to learn. So that's sort of the story on that. The second big change that's affecting learning is what's going on in the nature of jobs. So let me give you just 1 minute on this because we don't have a lot of time. But it used to be, and I think this is probably going back to the, sort of the industrial age, that we had, when Frederick Taylor was studying how to build steel in the steel industry in the Midwest. We had these people, and we had this work, and we broke it down into jobs. And then we created an organization around the jobs, and we created a manager based on the number of people we had. If we had 5, 6, 7, 8 people, we would put a manager on top of that. Then we would create job descriptions, and then we would hire people that fit those job descriptions. And so if you go out and you look at job descriptions, and I'm sure you've all had a chance to write them and read them, they have skills, they have, your responsibilities, who you're going to report to, what level you are. There's a title. Some of the titles are, a little hard to understand. And then you go to work, and you know what happens. The first week, the job's not quite what they said it was going to be. And then the month after that, it changed a little bit more. And the job changed because the industrial model, which this was built around, isn't really the way companies work anymore. Because most of us differentiate ourselves based on speed and time to market and creativity, not just based on production. So the new world looks a little bit more like this. You have people, and you have work that needs to be done, and you look at the technology you can use to automate and improve and inform those tasks. If you're Amazon.com and you use Kiva robots, you look at what the robots are capable of doing, and then you take the humans and you wrap them around that to add additional capabilities or complement the capabilities that the machines can do. The best example I think we all know is the ATM machine in the branch banking industry. When I was at IBM in the 1980s, banks were talking about shutting down their branches. They weren't going to need them anymore because we were going to do all our banking online. There's actually 5 times as many tellers now as there branches as there were in the 1980s. Because what happened is that technology has expanded the number of transactions we can do with the bank. Now the banks are doing many, many more things than they used to do, and you have to go into the branch to get support and help and to get advice. And so the tellers' jobs got better and higher paid and higher skilled in the last 30 years. They didn't go away. So we now have a sort of a world where roles and skills and capabilities and experiences are more important than the technical skills. And if you look at job descriptions in the job assessment market, 60 to 70% of companies now assess people based on culture, based on fit. You've seen Goodco outside, those guys are doing some really cool stuff in this area because the technical skills don't really define the job anymore enough. So the nature of work and the nature of jobs have created even a bigger demand for learning. Another factor that's affected learning, thank you, is this. We're all living a lot longer. This is in fact maybe one of the most miraculous inventions of really technology is longevity. We're living, I think, what's the data? About every year we live about another 3 months. So our children are very highly likely to live into their hundreds, which means they'll have careers that might be 70, 75 years long. It turns out, I just found some research the other day that I was noticing that only 39% of companies even allow or expect people to work past the age of 65 in their companies. I actually have to retire from Deloitte at the age of 62, which still is kind of surprising to me. So we're going to have people living longer, and the average age of a company on the S&P 500 is only 15 years. So if you live 70 years, if you work for 70 years, there's no way you're going to work in the same company. Maybe you are if you're lucky, but in the same job, in the same role, in the same, your profession's probably going to change. So those are all drivers of the learning industry. Now we did a lot of research that I published last month in Deloitte University Press in an article called Catching the Wave on what's happening in careers. And if you look at, there are some pretty clear trends about how these jobs are changing. And they tend to be focused on skills needed in really what are called hybrid jobs. Jobs are becoming more social, more multidisciplinary, more hybrid. And this is 2 pieces of data here. It's a little probably hard to see this slide on the left. The slide on the left shows the jobs that are increasing in value versus the jobs that are decreasing in value. And you see that all of those jobs really have social or design or multifaceted sort of Renaissance type skills associated with them. The chart on the right shows the change in the nature of the jobs even in data science, even jobs where people are searching for technical, mathematical scientists. They're now looking for people that have skills in creativity, design, communications, teamwork. So my point is that the ability for you or for us to give people the capability to constantly re-educate themselves is really vital to their success. And we're reaching a point where we really are all managing our own career on a pretty regular basis. And in the article I wrote about, sort of how careers work, it's sort of like, and it turned out to be a really good analogy. It was just sort of an example, sort of a funny, when we were trying to come up with the title of this article, it's really like surfing. You catch a wave, you ride it into shore, you take a little while to rest, and you paddle back out and catch another one. And that's really what our careers are like. And that means you're going to have more and more continuous reinvention going on inside of your company. Okay, now where does L&D fit into all this? We're not doing such a good job, to be honest. I think we're past this, but we've been doing research on this for about 15 years. And Danny Johnson, who is our lead analyst in L&D, published this research in May. Of the 1,000 or so companies we surveyed, the Net Promoter Score of L&D was negative. It was -8. And amongst business leaders, it's even lower. So I think I think that's a lower rating than the IRS. So, and I don't think it's for lack of hard work, it's not for lack of great people, it's not for lack of passion and energy and creativity, it's because the market just got out of sync. We had a lot of old technology, we had a lot of old systems, and everything moved faster than we could catch up. If you look at the speed of change in the L&D market, and I've been working on these kinds of charts now for a long time, we have changed just about everything. We've changed the nature of content, we've changed the nature of the technology under the content, we've changed the nature of the concept of how we develop it. You know, the ADDIE model, obviously it's still a good idea, but we don't need it as much when we talk about things like micro-learning. We have search tools, we have videos being authored. On my way down here in the car, it was a hilarious conversation on the radio about a woman who's having a nervous breakdown because a young girl who created her own YouTube channel, and she's doing a new YouTube every day to try to keep up with her audience, and she was so frantically trying to do these YouTubes, she had a breakdown at the age of 28. I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, you know, this world, this technology's got a little out of hand, and L&D hasn't been able to keep up. So we've been through a lot. So where are we? Let me give you, in the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes I have, where I think we are and why we're in a perfect position to take advantage of all these changes. Number one, the word micro-learning is really an important word. And I'll give you just my assessment of what micro-learning means. Every one of us have two sort of modes of learning. And again, I'm simplifying a much more complicated problem. Sometimes I need to learn something significant that I know how to do. Maybe I'm in a role or a job or a project or an assignment where I'm really out of my comfort zone and I need to step away, I need to read a book, I need to talk to an expert, I need to go to a class. I really need to do what you might call macro learning. Moocs, for example, are a great opportunity for macro learning. All the things we heard about earlier. But generally speaking, while I'm doing my work, I'm learning all the time. And as Charles said, I'm learning on the job. And I might have 5 minutes or 10 minutes in the car or standing in line at the Starbucks, and I want to take advantage of that time, and I've got these devices, and that's what micro-learning is. And I think the biggest revolution we have is that we're now building the infrastructure and the tools and the methodologies for both of these to coexist. One way to think about it is to think about it like this. In every job, you go through a very steep learning curve at the beginning. You plateau at some point when you've kind of got it under control. You start to get a little bit bored, and then something happens to move you back up the learning curve. If it's a great company and you have a great boss, you get a new assignment, you get promoted, you get more responsibility, you get a new project, and you go back up and you get to learn again. If it's not a good company, if it's not a good boss, if it's not a good environment, you go down and you either quit or you retire in place, or you just check out and you say, I'm kind of tired of this, I need to look for something else to do. If you think about that model, in the beginning, you need macro learning to get started. That's what onboarding is. It's a fairly significant immersive experience. In fact, companies are putting more and more and more into onboarding and extending it to a longer period of time. While you're in the job and while you're growing and developing yourself and learning how to do the job, you're going to need micro-learning. At some point, you're probably going to say, you know what, I could teach somebody else how to do this, so I'd like to be the teacher or the trainer or get promoted, or maybe I'll go work in sales training for a while and help the other people do what I learned how to do as a salesperson. And you'll go back and you'll become a teacher. And in my experience in the learning space, and certainly, and I wrote a book on this a long time ago, teaching is the best way to learn. If you have an opportunity to teach somebody else, you suddenly pull into your brain all these things that you didn't really know that you knew how to do, and that becomes you become even better and better and more expert in what it is you know how to do. We know that this works because it's now being used all over the world. 90-some-odd% of the companies that were surveyed recently by e-learning guilds said that they are now building micro-learning. Now, 5 years ago, we didn't even have a micro-learning platform. We kind of didn't even know what it was. We were just sort of putting stuff on YouTube and trying to figure out how to get our LMSs to do it. We also know by the way, and this is another fascinating piece of research I think is well worth reading, that we have this idea of space learning. People forget things that they very quickly. There's a professor by the name of Ebbinghaus who did research on the training of medical students. And when you have to learn anatomy in medical school, you have to learn all of this jargon and all these systems of the human body. And he found that the more he taught students, and I think this was at Purdue University, the less they knew. They forgot more and more and more the more they taught them. And he learned through experiments and with the medical students at Purdue that if we taught them a little bit each day and gave them time between, and then asked them a question, and then went back the next day or the day after that and taught them a little bit more, the curve would get shallower and shallower and shallower, and they would forget less and less and less. So there's techniques now to training where we can give people continuous re-injections of content in a strategic way to remind them of things that they are trying to learn that are more difficult to learn, and they will learn more and more and more over time. This is technology that really, in some sense, EdCast's can build into the platform that we could never do in an LMS. We never really had platforms like this in the past. And this is becoming, and I just mentioned a couple of vendors here that do this, that I think is a really significant part of your infrastructure. Virtual learning is big. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we just had a big demo. I went down to a I'm a very skeptical person about new technology. I've kind of learned to be, fairly skeptical in the beginning. I wasn't that excited about How many of you were starting to get sick to your stomach during that demo? I was. I went down and saw these guys who are doing virtual learning. This particular company blew my mind. They are using it at Walmart, they're using it at UPS, they're using it at United Rentals. They're now teaching people how to literally place themselves in the middle of a Walmart store during Black Friday and figure out what to do when 500 people walk in the door at the same time. And that's what they do. And you should see it. It is absolutely unbelievable. It just blew my mind. So this is part of the learning landscape. The Moocs are part of the learning landscape. I don't think the Moocs are going away. I think they're just finding their niche. We're finally figuring out where they belong. Because I think there was a period of time when we really kind of thought, maybe the Moocs would be everything. Okay, so are we ready for this? Yes, I believe we are. Number one, we've already shifted our content delivery. We've done research on this. We've moved a significant amount of our content online. We're spending much more time in apprenticeship and on-the-job training. I mean, when I started doing this research back in 2006 or 2005, 70 to 80% of the dollars spent on training were on ILT. It's much, much less. At Deloitte, for example, we have no professional instructors, none. All the courses are taught by consultants, and all the rest of the learning is done on the job as part of a project. And Deloitte's a pretty cool company and does a pretty good job of training. Number two, we now have technology that accommodates the new world of learning. Most of you know what SCORM is. You've probably had a lot of experience with it. SCORM was designed to serve the needs of CD-ROM training that was developed primarily for Boeing in the 1970s and 1980s. And it did a good job of allowing us to track traditional courseware that was relatively monolithic in structure. Now that we have lots of micro-learning, we have the X API, the Tin Can API, and we have systems that can actually track everything that we do. We didn't have that 5 or 6 years ago, so we had no way of managing all this stuff. People are picking this up. If you look at the more recent research, this is from eLearning Guild also, on what L&D professionals are looking for, what they're asking for, they're looking for personalization, adaptive delivery, collaborative, social learning, micro-learning. These are the hot trends because people realize, and I'm sure you do too, that this is where the action is. This is what people are going to adopt and this is what people are going to use. Capabilities are changing. We do a lot of work on capability assessment of the L&D department and the L&D profession. Design thinking, we've probably heard about that 10 times today. Curation, facilitation, teaching people how to build content and produce content, taxonomies, understanding how to build user experiences. Those are things that weren't really big issues in the L&D professional a decade ago either, and those are now becoming commonplace. So the whole ecosystem is getting ready for this. And of course, there's the issue of culture, and I just want to spend 1 minute on this. And I think, the woman who's up here from Shire, I thought we have a great discussion of this, as did Salesforce. If you don't build a culture of learning, this stuff doesn't sort of consume itself. And one of the things we learned in our research, and this came out in the High Impact Learning Organization research we just did in May, is that we still have to focus on making sure that people have time, that they're being rewarded, that the content experience is compelling, that leaders reinforce and tell stories about learning, and that the learning organization is continuously getting the budget it needs year after year. And I think most CEOs are at the point where they get that now. The architecture's become clear. The LMS is not the center of the universe anymore. I'm sorry for those of you that are in the LMS industry. I know there's probably a couple in here. You guys are not going away. The LMS market is a $3.5 billion market. I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it's going to move into the background. It's going to be more like a mainframe in the basement, and people are going to be using tools like EdCast's to consume content, and that whole layer is going to be built up around it. And we still need all these other things as well. The way I sort of define the marketplace, and I put this out in an article, and I think it was in March, and got a lot of feedback on it, is we really have sort of 5 or 6 categories. We have content or technology like EdCast's, which are really like experience platforms. We have program management systems that manage programs like Moocs. We have the micro-learning platforms, and I have a feeling that the micro-learning technology will move into the category of where EdCast's is. We have content, we have assessment tools, including virtual reality. We have the LMS platforms that are trying to turn themselves into experience platforms. And then we have these things called learning record stores. And GE and other companies, including Visa, have basically built LMS-like tracking systems using a learning record store, reducing the dependence they have on the LMS. And I'm not saying here that you shouldn't have an LMS, but if you're spending millions and millions of dollars on an LMS, you might scratch your head and say, why am I spending so much money on this when it's mainly a tracking system? So this is becoming clear too, and I think that's another reason why the market's going to grow. And we also have so many examples now, including General Physics, GP, and the other companies that have stood up here all day, to show you what this really looks like, that we don't have to imagine it, we can actually see it, and we can do it in our own companies. Okay, final thing I want to wrap up with, because I know we're a little bit short on time. How do you get there from here? Now, I really have kind of two messages. Number one, the market is ready. The rate of growth of companies like EdCast's is going to be higher and higher and higher over the next couple of years. We get a lot of inquiries from companies, about their learning infrastructure and their learning strategy, and they're all looking at using the categories of products I showed you earlier. Second is that there is a maturity to getting there. This is the we do these maturity models all the time. You guys have probably seen many of these. This is the one that we introduced in May. And what you see, what happened, is what we used to call continuous learning, which was the level 4 of our model a couple of years ago, moved to level 3. And there's a new level 4, which Danny decided to call, it's kind of a little bit of a geeky phrase, but anticipatory learning, or flow. And the idea of that is really what we've been hearing about all day, is giving people an environment, including a cultural environment as well as a technology environment, that the employees and the managers and the workforce themselves can access and use learning as needed when they need it. And I think that's really what HP is doing when I listen to HPE, and I really think that's what Salesforce is doing, is really creating level 4 learning. And you can see how quickly the companies have jumped up on this maturity. Now, I think most of you who are in this room are probably not at level 1 and level 2, but there's still a lot of companies there. I mean, I talk to many, many companies who still come to me and say, we've got 18 different training departments, we have 7 LMSs, we have thousands of libraries of content, 80 to 90% of which we don't even know how to use, to say nothing of the fact that people don't know how to find it. And so some of the companies are still at the bottom, but I think we're moving up that scale very, very quickly. Now, just to sort of give you one last piece of motivation, in this survey, in this study that came out in May, we asked the companies at level 3 and level 4, many of the same questions we asked at level 1 and level 2, and you can see that the companies that moved to level 3 and level 4 had 8 times higher net promoter scores. Their employees loved it. In fact, I have yet to talk to a customer who purchased EdCast's or any of the related products who didn't tell me that within 6 months to a year, it just took off like a wildfire because people really liked it. So we're at a stage of the market where this is easier to do than ever before. And these companies not only improve the learning experience for their employees and their HR department, but they're making more money, they're generating more profit, they're better run companies, as Kevin was talking about a little bit earlier. So my message to you, I guess, in this final presentation, and I apologize for having to be the last speaker of the day, is that this is the time. No more talking about it and saying, someday we'll figure out what to do about our learning experience. You can fix it, you can do it today. The tools are available, the technology is becoming mature, it's now becoming very clear how the categories work. Now I think it's going to be confusing for many of you, when your LMS vendor comes to you and says, we do what EdCast's does. I mean, they're going to say that. And you're going to have to sort out who's really telling the truth. But I think it's become very clear, and to me it's a very exciting time, because I think for the first time in the last 5 or 6 years, the L&D market is going to go shooting up. Our net promoter score is going to be positive again, I certainly hope. And the marketplace is going to flourish with all of the new technologies that we have available. So, Carl, thank you again for inviting me. I'm sorry that I probably went a little bit too fast because we're a little bit short on time, but thank you all for inviting me. And I just want to say it's been, for me personally, just a joy to work with all of you all these years and be a part of this community and this industry. And I look forward to talking to you all, one at a time later this evening if we have time also. Thank you.